Hello, everyone. Welcome to Turf Topics, presented by Aquarigen Turf Solutions. Our guest is Keith Lyall, the superintendent at the Sun Peaks Resort in Sun Peaks, British Columbia. Located roughly 5 hours northeast of Vancouver, Sun Peaks is the highest elevated course in British Columbia at an altitude of just over 3,900 feet. The golf season is short, lasting somewhere between 3 and 4 months. Because of those circumstances, Lyall is forced to do things a little bit differently. He talked about that during our conversation.
Well, it's certainly, it's not usual. I wouldn't say my own rule book, but, you really have to think differently. We just don't have enough growing degree days here. I would say I haven't done the growing degree day math because I'm afraid to see the results, but I would say I've got about 6 weeks of good growing conditions throughout the entire year. It's either too cold, then we get probably too hot. So there's about 3 or 4 weeks in the spring and about 3 to maybe 4 weeks in the fall, which spring and fall for me are, spring is May, June, and fall is late August, September.
So how did you end up in that locale and at that line of work? I know you've been there a very long time.
19 years I've been here. I've been in the industry for 28. I was in construction, landscape construction, residential carpentry in my youth. And back in 1990, early 90s, the construction industry around the city that I live in, Kamloops, was just outside of Sun Peaks. Construction industry collapsed. We were struggling with a right-wing government, I'll call them, and construction just collapsed. But golf was still booming in those days in British Columbia. So there was a golf course in an area we used to party as kids, and my mom knew the superintendent. She was a horticulturalist. Worked with the former assistant at another golf course. He was growing in this golf course, so I went in there and got a job building them a shed, a little shed for their equipment, and they put me on the golf course after that, and I just fell in love with it. I worked there for 4 years, went to school, a local college program here, and then down to Vancouver. Went up north to a little community golf course in a place called Williams Lake. And then I had skied in this mountain my whole life as a kid, and I knew they had a 9-hole golf course, and we used to make fun of them back in the day because that's a golf course and that's never going to survive. I saw they were building a back nine, so I reached out to the then superintendent, and he hired me as the growing assistant out during the back nine. And 2004 and 2005 he up and left, and September 2005, they gave me the job as superintendent, so been here ever since.
There's something special, isn't there, about being the superintendent at a place where you helped grow it in?
Well, I got to finish off the construction of the last 4 holes they hadn't had finished. In 2003, we had some major wildfire issues through the province, so they couldn't get much done in 2003. So I came in, finished off the irrigation, shaping, seeding, and fired everything up sort of at the end of 2004, and then 2005 was all about the grow-in. We were scheduled to open in early August. Superintendent left about 2 weeks before we were about to open. I convinced them to delay it a couple of days. I sodded 2 fairways and just put my heart and soul into the place.
In terms of maintaining the golf course, how do you set your priorities? Because your season is so compressed, you've got to think about things somewhat differently. So how do you prioritize your man hours, your cruise hours, and all that?
Well, I think, similar to most superintendents, it's, when we're open, it's getting the course ready for players. So that for me is number one. Number two, I think, is the agronomy stuff. So the top dressing, spraying, irrigation repairs. So I do have a good group, especially this year. So it's kind of putting the right people in the right place at the right time. I don't think that's much different than what most people do, but we're always looking ahead to winter. Our biggest struggle here is snow mold or fusarium. They call it snow mold in the winter and fusarium in the summer, but it's microdocium, however you look at it. And we have it growing here year round. So that's the biggest struggle, and that's sort of what my biggest fight is to make sure that we're keeping that stuff suppressed as much as we can. And then I don't think that we do much that's unique, short of compressing everything into a 3-month season. I tried to do 3 aerations here when the first few years I was here. I've since learned that there's no point in doing that. I will not defeat thatch by aerating 3 times a year, and it just upsets my customers. So I'm trying different things. I'm using different products, rolling, top dressing, adding bacterial products. Our soil temperatures stay very low, so it's got its own challenges. But I'm trying to approach them scientifically as opposed to manpower.
How did you get introduced to Aquarigen? You mentioned you've been using Defend. So how did you get introduced to that product?
My sales rep, he sells a product called Turf Health Products, so it's the micros and the amino acids and so on. He started carrying it a number of years ago and started talking about it. And what piqued my interest is when he used the term nanotechnology, because I'm a bit of a nerd, and I had read a little bit prior to that about nanotechnology, specifically in the medical field, and that piqued my interest as soon as he said that. So just like Aquarigen does today, they were giving out free samples. So he convinced me to put a sample down, and to be honest, I didn't notice anything right away. I just don't think one sample would have been enough to make a difference. But so I tried it, and the next year I thought, you know what, let's just buy into this, because being a smaller particle, my thought process would be that it would be easier to get into the plant, which my plants struggle to grow because it is so cold up here. It should be easier. It should make the product get in there and do what it's supposed to do. So the next year I bought in full to the program, and I had to do a bunch of different stuff. We've lost a lot of fungicides in BC over the last 15 years. So what used to be kind of easy has turned into really making things somewhat challenging. So I started
because
to see
of legal issues and whatnot.
Well, they were just getting rid of stuff from a health and safety point of view. Quintazine, hyperdion. There's a bunch of them that have since been erased from our toolbox. So and then some of the construction methods they did here when they built the 9 before I got here, and the choices that the superintendent made, just they made it a lot harder to have the product that I wanted. So I had to incorporate a bunch of different activities kind of all at the same time. One of them was drill and filling. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the process. You drill out an inch worth of soil, a green soil, and then you put in 100% premium sand. That improved my drainage. That's made a huge difference because the sand was kind of choked out. And then I started a full-on summer fungicide program, and then I introduced Aquarigen all in and around the same time. And those three items have turned my greens around. I mean, they were always kind of looking sickly yellow there, and I knew I had to do something. I approached my bosses and said, "Look, you guys made a big mistake not putting a pea stone layer on this. We've got to do something." I could see diseases were taking over: whitea, snow mold, anthracnose. We have pythium problems. So I kind of bought in. I got some soil tests done to see how much, or disease tests done to see how bad it was, and it came back mind-blowing how awful things were. So those 3 things would be the biggest contributor. But the one thing, and I've been speaking this a lot about in those days, new algae, was my worm castings. So we were starting to see significant problems with worms. It wasn't all earthworms. It wasn't that bad when I first got here. I noticed a lot in the rough. But over time, they were starting to migrate onto fairways, tees, and it was starting to get pretty bad on greens. So when I did that first summer of essentially every 2 to 3 weeks putting new algae or quercetin Defend down, the worm problem went away. So I kind of went back into some of that nanotechnology research, and from my opinion, and I'm no scientist, but I think what's going on is the silica in quercetin irritates the skin between the segments of the worms. So because I put it down regularly, it gets on there, and they don't like it, so they take off. When I stop using quercetin, right now, if you go on my greens, you'll see some castings. It's not many, but in 3 or 4 weeks here, once the snow melts and we're getting out there with the sprayer, I won't have a worm casting in sight. So for that reason and that reason alone, since then is why I use quercetin, because there is no registered molluscicide in Canada that I can use to control worms. I don't think there is any. I don't know about the States, but I certainly know Europe doesn't have any.
Looking at the impact that quercetin has had on the turf, you mentioned the worm issue, but how has it impacted what your greens look like?
I would say it's made a difference in color. When I first started using it, I definitely noticed an increase of color. In and around the same time, I started upping my nitrogen levels. Kind of risky because I already have a thatch problem, but the turf, just like I said, just wasn't sufficient looking to my eye, and I wanted to see it greener. So I was discussing this with my sales rep, John Reed, and that's when he'd mentioned this quercetin and talking about the nano. So I would say that there's definitely been an improvement to the color, and from what I have read about silica and what it does to the turgidity of the plant, I noticed the plant is a lot, what's the word I'm looking for, turgid. I mean, it does stand up a lot better now. We don't get as much lying down. However, and I did this before, but our brushing greens hasn't had to be as frequent since I've started using it, and all of that I definitely would contribute to the silica. And from what I understand, the more I've been learning about silica and the lack that the plant couldn't take it in its normal form, it's my belief that because it's a nanomolecule, the plant can take it in, and there's definitely a benefit to it.
Our thanks to Keith Lyall from the Sun Peaks Resort for joining us on this edition of Turf Topics, and our thanks to all of you for joining us. We invite you to join us next time.